Well, I read an article the other day, and I must be getting older because I can't remember where I read it. But I assure you, I'm not making this up, as ridiculous as this may sound. I read that there's a trend among younger people to install landlines in their homes. It seems that they have discovered the wonderfulness of a landline. They love being able to put down their cell phones and just know that someone can get a hold of them using their landline. And they also like it when they call a landline. They don't know who's going to be picking up on the other side of the call. Especially if their friends are having a party, they don't know which one of the friends is going to pick up. And no answer machines either. Just ask anyone under the age of 25, well, maybe 35, if you should leave them a voicemail, and the answer is absolutely not. Just text me what you need. In fact, many people are that exact same way. They would rather you just text them. So landlines. I didn't have that one on my 2024 bingo card. I guess it's like bell bottoms and high-waisted pants and flannel. It all just comes back around again, I suppose. My parents had one of those yellow phones. You know, that gold color that matched the appliances, that harvest gold. And it was a rotary dial phone. And if you had a rotary dial phone, you hated dialing anyone with more than one 9 in the number. 9, clickety, 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 click. 9, clickety, 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 click. It takes like 5 minutes to dial 9999. And if your phone rang, you didn't know who was calling. Of course, it was way before caller ID, and you just picked it up. Nowadays, someone calls you and your phone tells you who it is and if it's a suspected spam caller. My dad worked at a meat processing plant, and there were times that the phone would ring in the evening, and it was the plant calling because something went wrong on the night shift. When I got into my teenage years, the supervisor on the other end would sometimes mistake me for my dad, all because you didn't know for sure who was going to pick up the phone, and I must have sounded old enough to be my dad. When we know someone well enough, though, we know their voice. We know our loved ones' voices, and we can pick them out of a crowd. When we spend time enough with someone, we learn the sound of their voice. I can still hear my grandmother's voice calling out to me from the other room in my head, even though she's been gone for years. When we love someone, we learn the sound of their voice. We know that when that voice is lying. We know when that voice is stressed. We know when that voice is irritated. I bet some of you could tell your mother was irritated with you just by the sound of clearing that throat just the right way. Today is Good Shepherd Sunday, a fitting Sunday for confirmation, for affirmation of baptism. And every year on the fourth Sunday of Easter, it is Good Shepherd Sunday. And we hear from the 10th chapter of John, and we hear about sheep and shepherds today. We here in Iowa are used to being in an agricultural state. It doesn't take us long for us city folk to see corn and beans when we take a trip outside of town. We know the difference between corn and beans, and we have seen the hay bales, even though the shapes have changed over the years. And we know the deep, dark color of John Deere green, and we know international red, and the two shall never be joined together. And we also know what kind of animal is being raised on the farm as we pass along on the cars and our highways. Each animal has that distinctive smell. And my grandfather called that the smell of money. And we often see cows and pigs, but here in Iowa, we don't see sheep nearly as often. And when I think of sheep, I think that sheep aren't the smartest animal in the barnyard. I mean, we often hear about being a sheep is bad, especially as it relates to blindly following something. You're just a sheep. It's not a compliment. Barbara Brown Taylor tells a story of an acquaintance who actually had grown up on a sheep ranch. Yeah, that's a thing. I didn't know either. And that person could dispel the myth that sheep are dumb. Supposedly, it was the cattle ranchers in the Old West that started the rumor because sheep don't behave exactly like cows. Cows are herded from the rear with shouts and prods from the cowboys, but that doesn't work with sheep. If you stand behind a sheep making a bunch of noise, all that happens is the sheep will run around and get behind you. Turns out that sheep aren't dumb, they just have different behavior than cows. Cows can be pushed. Cows can be prodded. Sheep prefer to be led. Sheep must be led. And sheep will not go anywhere that someone else, that trusted shepherd, does not go first, just to show them that everything will be all right. It turns out that sheep seem to consider their shepherds as part of the family. And the relationship that grows between the sheep and the shepherd is quite exclusive. And they develop a language of their own that outsiders just aren't privy to. In Jesus' day, there would be times when multiple shepherds would bring their flocks together, whether by accident or on purpose, and they would gather them in a paddock, an area that was walled off to keep predators out of the flock. And the sheep would mingle together and do all the things that sheep do. Now that presents a problem for the shepherd. How do you tell your sheep apart from the other shepherd's sheep? For cattle ranchers, they have a way. It involves a hot iron and pane. The cattle is branded so that one rancher will know which cows are theirs and which cows are someone else's. For sheep, when the shepherds would leave the paddock, they would just call out to their flock, and the sheep would hear the shepherd's voice and would follow. The shepherd's voice is key. The sheep know their shepherd, and they know which shepherd to follow. No need for the shepherd to search each sheep for a brand and to separate them. The sheep know. But the sheep are still sheep. Sheep wander off. Sheep fall into ravines. The shepherd still needs to go and find them when all that happens. The shepherd's voice is key. Jesus tells us today, I know my own, and my own know me. They know my voice. We live in a noisy world, don't we? I don't just mean that the world is loud, because it is, but I mean noise in all sorts of different ways. We have so many things coming at us, competing for our attention. They all want us to listen to them. And there are so many different voices. And we are being pushed from behind. We are being prodded to go in all different directions that we don't need to go. And we have the voices in the world that tell us all sorts of different things. We strive after, we follow all sorts of things that sound nothing like the Good Shepherd. And those voices say things like, you haven't done enough. You aren't pretty enough. You aren't smart enough. You certainly aren't rich enough. You aren't funny enough. You aren't good enough. You aren't enough. No one loves you. We put filters on our photos. We wouldn't want someone to see a wrinkle or a blemish. We do that because of those voices in the world. And we curate our lives so that everyone thinks everything is just fine, even when it's not. And as bad as those voices, those outside voices are, it isn't just the world that tells us these things. We listen to ourselves so often. We tell ourselves all sorts of things that just aren't true, and we just don't know how to stop that internal voice. And that internal voice tells us, I haven't done enough. I am not pretty enough. I am not good enough. I am not rich enough. I am not funny enough. I am not loved. I am not enough. Things like, have I done enough to get into heaven? Things like, have I been good enough so that God loves me? When we question God's love for us. Ever have those thoughts? Today's gospel lesson is part of a longer story. It begins back into chapter 9 with a man born blind. And as Jesus and his disciples are walking along, they see this blind man, and the disciples ponder out loud. They ask Jesus, who sinned? The man or the man's parents that he was born blind? And this question reveals a lot about ourselves. We think that the ills and the sufferings of this world are on some level inflicted upon us by God. But Jesus reveals that it is not the case. And Jesus' answer was neither the parents nor the man sinned. And then Jesus bent down, made mud with his saliva, spread the mud on the man's eyes, and then instructed the man to go and wash off in the pool of Siloam. And the man only hears Jesus' voice throughout this whole interaction. The man makes his way to the pool, kneels down, washes off the mud, and as he finishes clearing the mud off, he realizes that he can see. He knows the wonders of the colors blue and brown and green and red, colors he could never even fathom. And the Pharisees question him, and the people argue over who he is, and they don't believe what has happened, and the people question him over and over, and his only answer is that Jesus made some mud, spread it on his eyes, and then told him to go to Siloam and wash. It was then that I received my sight. That's the man's answer to the people. And the Pharisees question, trying to discern what has happened. And they cannot question Jesus because he's nowhere to be found. And the Pharisees don't like the fact that it was Jesus who did it in the first place, and they didn't like it that he did it on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees question and they badger. And the answer is always the same. Jesus healed me. And then, tired of their questions, his frustration boils over and he blurts out, I have told you already so many times. Jesus came to me, found me, spread mud on my eyes. I was once blind, but now I see. Do you want to become his disciples? And they are angered beyond belief, and they toss the man out of the synagogue. Instead of celebrating the healing, they throw him out. When Jesus hears that this man has been tossed out, he finds this once blind man a second time. And the blind man doesn't know who's approaching him, but the voice sounds familiar. Do you believe in the Son of Man? And the once blind man responds, who is the Son of Man? Who is he so that I may believe? And Jesus responds, you are speaking with him. Jesus, the shepherd, comes back for the lost sheep, brings him back into the flock, The once blind man heard Jesus' voice calling out to him, and he gained an abundant life by becoming a sheep in Jesus' own fold. Lazarus will hear Jesus call his name and will walk out of a tomb into a resurrected life. Mary Magdalene will hear Jesus call her name, and in hearing her name, she will recognize her good shepherd and thus herself as one of the disciples. The good shepherd's voice tells us who we are and whose we are. It counters the voices of this world, and dare I say, that voice is hard to hear at times. So what needs to go? What needs to be cut out of your life so that you can hear the voice of the good shepherd calling you into an abundant life? Calling you into a life-giving life, calling you into a resurrected life. For those of you affirming your baptism today, make no mistake, this is a lifelong struggle to listen to the voice of the Good Shepherd. Some days the voice of the shepherd is loud and easy to hear. Thank God for those days. On other days, it can seem like the voice isn't there, but I assure you it is. And thank God for that. The Good Shepherd calls out to us as he leads us to the cross, where everything that cannot stand in the presence of the cross is blown away like chaff in the wind. And there's a push and a pull between the voices of this world and the voice of the Good Shepherd. And I pray that you all hear more clearly today and every day the voice of the Good Shepherd as he leads you all into an abundant life. I pray that you know the voice of the Good Shepherd well enough to recognize it when he calls you to follow him. Will you follow? And that's the question for today and every day. Amen.